This is the new return on investment in mobile device lifecycle management. I'll quickly go over our objectives for today and what we hope you'll be able to take away from the session, and then I will introduce our panel, and hopefully you guys can run away with it. The objectives for this session that we wanted to focus on were acknowledging the maintenance and disposition of devices into state infrastructures, establish forward-thinking and ongoing governance for effective operations from the workforce perspective, and recognizing new ROI and striking balance between providing and accommodating tools for service and accomplishing mission objectives. We are excited to have a broad spectrum of perspectives for our discussion this morning. Welcome and thank you to our speakers. We have Adrian Gardner, who is the Director of Information Technology and Communications Director and Chief Information Officer for NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. Mr. Gardner's federal career is distinguished by over 20 years of federal service, enabling mission capability and readiness within the scientific and defense-related sectors in an innovative and secure manner. In 2005, he was the recipient of the Federal Workforce Award. Mr. Gardner currently serves as the Director of IT and Communications Directorate. As such, he is responsible for providing the GSFC workforce the information, infrastructure, and tools that adapt and evolve to effectively and securely support management, science, research, and technology programs. Developing, implementing, and operating specialized IT systems to support NASA mission planning and operation, and providing systems that disseminate information to the public and that preserve NASA's information assets. Mr. Gardner is a doctoral candidate at the University of Southern California School of Public Policy and Planning, where he holds a master's degree in public administration. He also holds a Master of Science degree in environmental studies and an honorary doctorate degree from Cook College. Mr. Gardner holds a Bachelor of Science in Biological Science and Ecology from the esteemed Prestige Institute. Mr. Gardner served as an officer in the U.S. Air Force until he separated in 1989 and was honorably discharged in 1994. So welcome. Alex Terrell here is a Director of Project Assistance Division for the National Archives and Records Administration. Mr. Terrell is the Director of the Project Assistance Division within the Business Support Services at NARA. And as the Director of the Project Assistance Division, he is the owner of NARA's IT infrastructure, which includes NARANet, desktop software, mobile devices, and telecommunications. As the owner of the IT infrastructure, he is also the customer advocate for NARANet users. Prior to joining NARA, he was the Chief Enterprise Architect and IT Portfolio Manager at the National Institute of Flood and Agriculture, formerly CSREF, within USDA. He holds a Bachelor of Science from Michigan State University. To his right, we have Brian Kopsick, Mobility Leader and Application Industry Executive for Hewlett Packard Company. Mr. Kopsick is the Mobility Leader for Public Sector within the Enterprise Services Business Unit at HP. In this role, he is responsible for driving strategic mobility initiatives, key industry partnerships, and relationships to enable public sector clients to leverage the mobile channel to both extend their brands and more effectively reach their customers, constituents, partners, and employees. Brian is an active participant in various industry advisory councils to help government and industry exchange information and collaborate on technology issues within the private sector. Mr. Kopsick has almost 2 decades of experience in both public and private sector in a variety of senior roles that focused on emerging technologies and intersections of business strategy and technology. He's worked with several Fortune 200 companies to extend their brands, systems, and presence to effectively leverage the mobile channel. Brian is a frequent speaker, panelist, and blogger on the ways mobile innovations and social media are changing our lives. Thomas Martin is an MBA, manager of MHIMS. This is Healthcare Information and Management Systems Society. Currently is the manager of MHIMS, the mobile initiative of HIMS, a global not-for-profit focused on advancing healthcare through information technology. Thomas is also a doctoral student at the University of Delaware School of Public Policy, where his dissertation is focused on the evaluation of healthcare technologies, including mHealth. Thomas has previously worked for a Fortune 500 healthcare company in the United States and Asia Pacific, and for the Cleveland Clinic Foundation providing clinical care. His research interests include applications of cost-benefit analysis, comparative effectiveness, and other economic valuations within the healthcare setting. Welcome. Thank you for your attention. So to start, I'd like for each of our panelists to give us a brief description of your role and the organization's current mobile device environment.
Sure. So my role is as the CIO for Goddard Space Flight Center, basically supporting the needs of the center and its inhabitants. And my environment is primarily dominated by scientists and engineers. Scientists and engineers like diversity. So when it comes to mobile devices, we primarily have moved or begun to standardize around iPhones and iPads. And we sort of did that through trial and error almost, I would say. When I first got there as a CIO, we started out with an iPad pilot. I think we eventually adopted a DoD STIG. And now we're moving towards sort of virtual desktop infrastructure around our iPads and our mobile devices. The goal of that, obviously, is to move to bring your own device. Because I don't think that's something that we can spend a lot of time sort of running through the mental gymnastics around. I think it's automatically going to happen to us. So the approach that we're taking is sort of to embrace that and begin to work with our community of users to figure out how to make that happen. So we're running a number of pilots over the summer around virtual desktop infrastructure, and then also securing the desktop at the application layer, and then allowing folks to include our foreign national populations to be able to gain access to the resources that they need in order to actually perform their work activity. So that's what we are as far as the general introduction as far as mobile, and we'll get further questions later.
Can you hear me okay? At National Archive, as a Project Systems Division Director, as you said in the intro, I own NARANet, which encompasses the mobile devices, the desktops, the entire infrastructure, all the desktop software, and we have a pretty large dispersed area across the country, from Alaska to Atlanta to Boston. So we don't have a lot of mobile devices. We pretty much run a BlackBerry environment, which we've only had for about 3 years now. Prior to that, we just had cell phones. So it is, in NARA, it is a pretty new technology. And excuse me, I lost my train of thought. Most of the users at the archives don't really have a need for a BlackBerry device because they are dealing with records and archival material within their office. And to have a mobile device, they really don't move around that much where it would be needed. Most of the mobile devices are with the executives or with the people in the record centers that do travel a lot. Like the presidential libraries as well, they have their directors do a lot of travel, and they deal with a lot of private sector people as far as foundations and collecting and helping to the trust funds within there to help fund the libraries. As far as going from like iPad and iPhone, we did have a pilot project that our social media group ran. We had about 20 or so iPads. It was not part of the infrastructure, and part of our limitation within our infrastructure is we do run a Novell infrastructure with group-wise email, which does limit us to what we can actually use from a mobility standpoint.
Brian. Sorry, I'm Brian. As mentioned in my bio, I'm a mobility leader for public sector, and HP is really about building product, software, and solutions for all types of customers. A lot of my time is spent working with people like the gentleman on this panel to craft those software and solutions to meet those needs.
Tom Martin. I work for a nonprofit, so a slightly different perspective, but we're about 220, 250 employees, so I think pretty big for a nonprofit. We use a mix of both Android, iPhone, and iPads for employees. I work remotely. As far as healthcare goes, I think we talked a little bit before the panel, and we mentioned it a little bit here, and I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit more depth. And that's the bring your own device sort of environment in healthcare is really sort of closely aligned with that, because you have physicians who are coming in and out. You may not necessarily be associated with an IT environment, but still need access to data and information. So a number of the individuals that we represent through HIMSS and HIMSS are really focused on that bring your own device environment, and how can we maintain patient data security, keep up with the pace of tech change. If you look at the number of devices that come onto the market, bring your own device really allows you to satisfy a lot of your IT clients in a way that allows new technology to come online. I think a lot of people really get frustrated when they go home and they have a sleeker, faster machine at home, and then they go into work and they've got something that's clunky and outdated. So a lot of individuals are really concerned with organizations keeping up with the pace of change.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now we have a few takeaways that we wanted to make sure that you got out of the session, but I was wondering if there were any questions that you guys had off the top of your head that you really wanted to get into and help sort of steer the discussion, or if not, I can start us off.
I'm also keeping an eye on Twitter. So if anybody wants to tweet after the introduction today, I'll keep an eye on it.
Good. So what we hope that you will take away from this is how governance is or can be used to overcome the vulnerability of rapidly accelerating technology being brought into the market. Our speakers will hopefully be able to provide some insight on how they're handling creating a positive position using a commercial focus, high-level process and accountability. Are they better able to adapt to supporting the consumerization of mobility? For example, and how we can actually get into where those investment decisions are impacted, and where you can see the greatest return on those investments given the current legislative environment. And moving towards a device-agnostic environment, looking at setting guidelines to provide secure accommodation and disposition for workforce productivity, as well as consumer data content consumption. There's internal, how we have to actually work, and then how we're getting that information out. So actually, one of the questions that I recently thought of that I'm going to kind of throw at you guys is, so keep you on your toes. How have you found emerging technologies to impact your ability to protect and manage your mobile portfolio to help mitigate costs?
I guess if you look at one, the IT field in general is rapidly changing, and so one of the things that we've done is stood up an innovation organization that created that position underneath that reports to myself and my deputy. And we did that primarily because we need to be able to at least understand and harness the power of technology and emerging technology and where it's going. So we do a lot of outreach with industry. We take all comers. If you look at my schedule and the schedule of a number of the folks in that organization, it's extremely full because we want to hear back from industry on kind of what are the trends. What have they learned from the standpoint of deploying these technologies within their environment? And then, really adopting sort of an approach of a bake-off, which means fly before you buy. And so we've been able to bring people in, let them showcase their opportunities sort of in a safe environment where we have a test dev environment that's hosted in a cloud container that we have, and we began to stood up some of these capabilities. So what we're doing this summer is we're running a virtual desktop infrastructure pilot with a number of the interns coming in. We have about 350 of those coming into the environment that just arrived. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is actually do an outreach to them to see how this whole VDI experience would actually play out. And then we've also attracted another customer on the science side, where we can begin to look at the scientific aspects of running VDI, because a lot of them want more robust tools and capabilities, and then how can you actually really meet the needs of the diversity of requirements that are out there from a user population. And so we're really moving toward what would be almost like a virtual desktop infrastructure library, where individuals would be able to check in or check out an actual desktop configuration, make changes to that, It would then go back into the test dev environment. We would run security and everything else in the background on it, and then check it into the library for broad use. And so we're trying to move towards that model. And so I think if you look at emerging technologies, you've got to think about it in the context of it is going to happen. The question is when. We really can't, well, at least in my environment where we have scientists and engineers, I can't lock that down. I realize that as a CIO there, as a person that begins to run services. I can't lock it down from the perspective of saying that I don't have to consider the diversity. Now, there are things that I definitely will have to say that can't come into the environment, but we do have to go through the process of engaging the customer, looking at the user's requirements, running through some sort of structured process on evaluating the technologies, and then figuring out what will work best in the environment.
Well, most of the stuff that comes from based on emerging technologies from a mobile standpoint is happening in our social media group. Our infrastructure is pretty locked down, and the social media group, per direction of the Archivist of the United States, is kind of tasked with going out there and how can we communicate better with our customers, which would be the American people, based on archival material or genealogy. A lot of the genealogy people are constantly wanting to get access to our information. So the social media team is the one that really goes out, looks at what sort of mobile applications can be used, not only to help our business, but also to help communicate to our customers. And as they go through that, they then try to approach us from an infrastructure standpoint, and how can we make this happen and give it to our employees at that point. As I said before, because we have the Novell environment, we are kind of limited to the BlackBerry at this point, but we are looking at, as we move our email to the cloud, that'll definitely open up channels for allowing more mobile devices, iPads, iPhones, Droids, what have you, to be tested within our environment and then implemented at that point. And then that will increase the partnership between the social media, the infrastructure, and as well as the American people.
You know, we look at it slightly differently. You know, some of these technologies are just emerging, but really security in itself, you know, the attack surface, I would say, of the information, really the biggest one is the network itself. So enabling an end-to-end security model, and a lot of, you know, the containerization, things like that, are really focused more on a single provider model. Well, as it was released in the digital strategy, we're going to be working much more towards a network of things where you're going to have multi-providers in the same network. They may not all come through your own internal IT shop. They may be another government organization. So how do you secure that in that network of things? And then there's form factors that are coming. So realistically, understanding how the cloud, how you interact with that cloud, and how you have an end-to-end. There's technologies like OpenFlow, SDN, where literally the control of the network. Have my cell phone turned off. Is really going to be much more controlled. So your applications are going to become, and your networks are going to become much more intertwined. And so that managing that end-to-end security through that environment, so that there's a single point of authentication, and authorization, and that's carried, and then also enabling it to be monitored as the process. Because what we're seeing is most mobile malware attacks, it's good apps behaving badly, frankly. So those apps are being rerouted, man-in-the-middle type attacks. So ensuring that you have a secure end-to-end loop from front to back in your mobile environment is fundamentally key to ensuring that information security is maintained.
We heard a couple of topics. I'm just going to maybe retouch on some of them. And I think we heard customer-focused a lot. IT is no longer just a help desk. It's no longer just desktop computers. It's mobile phones. It's customer-facing. So one of the things I think once you start to interject customers into the discussion, you need to think about how you value customer interactions, and that will begin to lead you down the path of trying to decide, is a bring your own device strategy appropriate? Is looking at pilot programs appropriate? I think another thing that we need to think about is use cases. Just go out there and find organizations that are similar to your organization, but look at how they're using these technologies. I highly encourage anybody who's considering large purchases to maybe think of site visits, going out and interacting with your colleagues in constituents and seeing how they're leveraging this technology and how they're deploying it.
And I would just even like to tack on that. You brought up actually an excellent point. I think a lot of IT is really focused on a one-size-fits-all type approach. And whether you're in the BYOD camp or you're in the opposite, and believe it or not, even internally within HP, you'll find different people with differing opinions on that one, because of the audit compliance. But two things we all agree on. One size fits all does not fit. We must take a very hard look at who wants to do what, from where, with what, on what device. So even the same person may only have certain privileges within a certain application on a particular device. We actually built an application for a CFO. And he, certain things he could not do from a mobile device. There were certain things that he actually had to log on to a web browser, for lack of a better word, where it was controlled within the network. The other key one is user segmentation. Okay. Again, it goes back to who wants to do what, from where, with what. And that is fundamentally key in looking at it. So, a lot of us looked at gold images, endpoint security, where that model is really changing, and understanding how you're interacting and controlling it at the device level. If you can take some of the application context and inject that into the security, you will have a much more robust and actually much more affordable, because that flexibility provides cost, and it brings cost. Maybe some users need a container, maybe some don't. And understanding that and that choice enables a lot of flexibility, which also helps bring cost out of the model.
Yep, I agree. And actually, that's a good point. One of the things that we had discussed during some of our conversations and back and forth in preparing for the session was, in either the not-for-profit or government or supporting the government industry, how does the government position itself to act with the agility that the consumer, that the commercial market can, and being able to work towards those consumers. And what I'm curious about, and I think some of the others are, is when you're managing, obviously your information technology portfolio is broadened a great deal, and it includes a lot more. What sort of measures do you have for the threshold where you make those investment decisions? And have you really seen a culture shift or a change in being able to get more of those groups, such as HR, procurement, or whomever else, into that discussion to be able to make those decisions, because it's all so widely spread.
So I guess we have a couple of mechanisms. One is that we recently awarded several big infrastructure contracts within NASA. One is to HP for our desktop and our mobility capabilities. And the other thing is that we've always had a pre-existing large GWAC called SOUP. It's a solution for enterprise-wide procurement. Joanne is in the back, actually, just raised her hand. And so one of the things is that procurement has always allowed us a lot of agility from the standpoint of buying things and looking at constantly surveying the environment as far as what the latest and greatest is out there, and how can we quickly procure that. So NASA, I think, is in a little bit of a different position than a lot of the other agencies in order to accommodate that. But I think the piece of looking across how do we sort of manage our way through that, it's something we constantly have to keep our eye on. I mean, you gotta see is your acquisition sort of process and the acquisitions that you have in place, does it really support where you want to go as the CIO of that organization, with a focus on meeting the needs of the organization or agency? And then if there's a gap there, you've got to figure out a way in order to kind of fill that gap. And some of that is looking at contracts that other agencies have, other entities, so on and so forth. The other piece is really looking at it from the standpoint of, is there an ability to think of it in the context of okay, I may not be taking the steps now, but what is my glide path towards getting there, and communicating that out to your users? Because I don't know about your users, but a lot of mine are pushing us towards more collaborative kind of tools, more mobility. I mean, if you look at NASA's mission, a lot of our missions have sort of a social sort of networking engineering kind of ask to them from a standpoint of what are the apps and tools and RSS feeds that you put around a mission. A lot of that has become commonplace for us. And so a lot of those apps are actually, accessed through mobile devices. And so creating mobile web kinds of looks and feel where, you don't have to definitely go in and kind of, increase and decrease the size of it. It actually shows up on the mobile device as it would look like, it's very similar to if you were going to it on a page on your desktop or a laptop. And so I think we're going to think about mobility from the standpoint of what the user needs, and then where is that going to take us. And so looking at acquisition strategy and capabilities that you already have in mind, and then also looking at it from the standpoint of sort of a community of interest. From a security perspective, I began to look at NOAA, NASA, USGS, EPA. We probably have a very similar kind of security posture around our data and information. We're all information sharing organizations and agencies. Is there an opportunity for us to sort of work this problem together versus kind of in a stovepipe fashion of just NASA? And so thinking about it in those contexts as well is extremely important. And so what kind of partnerships are out there? Who can you benchmark? That's already been mentioned. And then what kind of acquisitions and capabilities provide you the opportunity to kind of deliver to the customer?
The archives previously had our mobile or cell phone contract where it only really allowed us to buy BlackBerries or cell phones. And then when the archivists wanted to get more into iPhones, iPads, they proceeded to purchase those with just credit cards, which then limited our ability to get support and services, so there was always one-off credit card things. And just this last year, we did a recompete and awarded a new cell contract, which would include BlackBerries and cell phones, but it included any mobile device that we want to buy, which would include iPads or our tablets, which then allows us, as we move forward, particularly as we look toward the cloud email and possibly moving our in-house support of our mobile devices to the cloud with the email, it then will allow us to then purchase the other mobile devices, Droids, iPhones, whatever, and it allows us to buy those a lot quicker, a lot faster. It takes maybe a day. Right now, if we try to buy those, you're looking at how long does a credit card purchase take, and then shipping a couple of weeks maybe. So it does allow us, with the way that we restructure our contracts, to move into newer devices a lot quicker as they come out. And then the support will already be there if or when we move to the cloud.
It's funny, Adrian probably covered a lot of the main thoughts on it. The one thing I would say is, getting that community together, because believe it or not, especially around this topic, users are pretty vocal. And if you mobilize something, you know what, they're going to want more tomorrow. So you got to figure out how do you prioritize it, and one of the things I like about mobility is in the beginning, and I've had a history here, it was every chief marketing officer. I want to get my brand on that channel. And then it quickly evolved into how do I make a transaction? And so I would even say within that working group that Adrian has is looking at it in terms of different domains. Probably the most popular question I get is, okay, I want to implement UAV. What do I need to do? It's like, I look at some of the CIOs and it's like, it's really not even an IT problem. It's an HR and legal problem. We're an enabler for the business, and we can help you craft that policy, but at the end of the day, it's really more about HR and legal and what their position wants to be. We were joking about it yesterday, but when I was with a commercial organization, email retention, largest expense. So I went to legal and said, okay, how long do we actually have to retain you? After about 3 to 6 months, and they didn't respond. Ended up getting escalated, things like that. In fact, was legal was not going to respond. Now in this environment, legal has to respond. And I say that kiddingly as a simple example, but those are real world scenarios where certain people didn't want to be accountable for those decisions. That's no longer the case because yes, there's liability involved. Yes, there's risk involved. You need to figure out what's an acceptable risk, and not just even at an organizational level, but across the different domains. And I think figuring out what your risk tolerance is, what makes sense. maybe, and I keep going back to the one size fits all doesn't fit. You know, certain things like email, calendar, etc. Maybe you allow that on an unmanaged device. Okay? But the closer and the higher you go up on the value stack, things like PII, they're never going to be released on an unmanaged device. I want real tight control of the one. In fact, what PII I will let you get on a mobile device may be very limited. So it's really a very, very different paradigm as opposed to the applications that we used to develop that I log in to the same application regardless of role, regardless of user profile, and it's all on that one interface. Fact is that probably doesn't fit. It's a 40-step process. It's quite possibly as we evolve, well, it's certain as we evolve, that may be a suite of applications or apps of apps, and those are going to become the relevant way to interact with the process flow and those business processes as we go forward.
Again, I work for a nonprofit, so I'm not going to pretend to understand the subtleties of government contracting, but we did an RFP for a native app that we just did, and I think that's one of the questions as you're maybe developing a strategy for applications. You need to think about, do I want to go with a native application that resides on a device, or do I want to do web optimized portals? So we had decided it was better to do a native app that pulls from RSS feeds, that pulls from our social media stream, but we also included some areas for incentivize. We did a marketplace for other individuals with apps who are corporate members of ours. You also need to think a little bit about advertising strategies. I'm not sure, given the recent direction on mobilizing for a lot of the federal agencies, how they can approach advertising as a way to perhaps offset costs, but there is a number of options out there for advertising, whether you want to do static ads, whether you want to do a server that rotates ads through an application. But in our RFP, we really sat down and we said, what are the major things that we want to communicate? And how do we go about achieving that? And to go back to the keynote this morning, it's a diverse team of people that you're going to have to bring together. It's going to be social media teams. It's going to be people with in-depth IT backgrounds. And it's going to be individuals who can help set the strategic direction for a project.
So is there any questions on anything that anybody said? No. Okay, well, go ahead, please.
Yeah, if you're looking at making a case for ROI for moving into mobility, what I'm hearing is that all of the work that's going on is additive. So you're adding devices, you're adding management stacks, you're adding connectivity charges to the existing IT baseline, right? If that's true, assuming it is, how do you make a case for ROI for adding costs rather than taking it out?
I mean, my response would be, I think you're adding it to the baseline, but you're also creating an opportunity where folks actually don't have to come into the office, right? I mean, so that's the piece that I would say that we would really begin to focus the ROI on. If you give them complete mobility, now that changes the dynamic from the standpoint of just the workplace and how you view the worker. And so there's a cultural aspect to that. So I think that is where most of the ROI will be realized. But getting to that is going to be very difficult, right? I mean, so I think it goes back to, what are we measuring? What are the metrics? How do we arrive at the ROI? And I think that piece has not necessarily been as well crafted, at least in the government space. I think that you see GSA and other agencies beginning to sort of nip away or at that particular issue. At NASA, we have parts of the agency that actually whole groups that are just not coming into work for a week in order to really exercise the way that they would do their commuting and sort of their telework sort of policies, and that will realize savings. Now the question is, if we really make that part of an institutionalized strategy for mobility, how are we going to be really able to track that ROI on an annual basis and roll it into the budget process? Because that's the next step, right? Because eventually they want to say, okay, you've saved, but now where do the savings come from? Is it a savings or is it a cost avoidance, right? Those parts on the ledger sheet are kind of always the tenuous decisions that the leadership has to make, right? Because you want you want to say it's a cost of one, it's not a savings, because the savings, will result on a decrease in your bottom line. And so I think we've got to begin to think about how we actually manage that from a business standpoint. Again, I think it goes back to having sort of these diverse work groups that kind of have that in mind on how we're going to get there. That would be my response.
Yeah, and intangibles are always tough to communicate up the chain to management. So I think if you want to define ROI, you start by casting a really broad net and saying, okay, I've been able to reduce interactions in this way or that way, however you want to define it. But make sure you define it and you cast that wide net to encompass all of these things that we can't necessarily ascribe a dollar value to that shows up on a ledger sheet or that shows up on a purchase order. So that's really a communication value that is difficult.
Now, from an archive standpoint, we did see some real cost savings when we did implement our BlackBerry solution. Prior to our BlackBerries, we did have to purchase our cell phones. They did not come free with the service. So when we switched to the BlackBerry, when the service cost was a wash, but then the devices those particular BlackBerry devices came free with the service. So we eliminated the cost of purchasing each one of these devices every year for upgrades. We're now, based on our contract negotiation with our provider, we just get those devices free. So that cost was completely cut out of the budget for devices at that point.
And this is one of those questions that I was fortunate I actually just recently wrote a blog on this. So, utilization is clearly one of the key ones. And I even have a couple quick examples, but, ability to do something faster, decision support, driving down the channel so that I'm able to make better decisions. Everybody has heard about 2008. And, loan origination is almost a classic textbook example. The further away I am from the origination of the loan, the more risk it has. So that's why you see a lot of the regional banks, things like that, doing so well. Okay, if you're collecting data at point of service, it is going to be the most accurate data. Less updates, less corrections, things like that. There is a cost associated. So a simple example, time and expense. Okay, what's the ROI of time and expense? Somebody asked me, and so I used an example. I actually wrote it in a previous company that literally we had about 86% on-time compliance, and it was a real problem. Okay, and we put out a mobile app within 2 weeks. Literally, it jumped to 99%. Just that simple, because it's on the go. You know what? I don't want to launch the app before I leave. I'm leaving the office. I'm in the car. I can literally just do it right there, and it's mindless. So, on-time compliance. Another one that I actually did for a potentially large client, or a pretty large client, was potholes. Okay, do you know what the number one reason why it takes so long to fix potholes? Because people report the wrong position. So injecting the context of the phone into it enables them to do 2 or 3 more a day. Well, you start multiplying that out, and it gets real quick. How the ROI gets panned out, better customer service. I may even be able to, in a lot of cases, I look at mobility as the power of while. It's the ability to deliver the good or service more efficiently while still cutting costs. And I think those are, especially for field service workers, irreplaceable. The ROI is real quick in these cases. You cannot find the ROI for a mobile app or something like that. I'm the first one to say, man, I really don't want to implement this one, because you got to cost justify it, especially in this budget climate.
Let me give one more example, which is real life. I don't know how many of you saw the tornadoes that hit Dallas recently. I don't know if you listened to the footage from a number of the folks, but they basically were saying that they were getting real-time updates from their mobile device. Well, we pulled, when I was at Weather Service, we were in the middle of actually developing that app and pushing it out to phones. And so you think about the ROI of that, where you had no loss of life, and you look at the number of tornadoes that hit Dallas. I mean, in the past, we would have assumed that there would have been some loss of life, but we had 0 on that from a standpoint of Weather Service. I say we because, I still feel an affinity to the Weather Service. But so if you look at that power of mobility and how it can impact the way decision makers make decisions, or individuals from the standpoint of those kinds of decision support situations, I mean, that's a huge ROI that I could probably not be, I wouldn't be able to really forecast the value or the cost of the savings, because I don't know what I would really place on a human life. But you think about folks turning to their mobile device saying, this is what kept me out of harm's way. Real time, I was able to move out of the course of the tornadoes, although they were changing track, right? And that was all done through a mobile device. So that's huge.
And actually, you know, it makes me think of another question here that we have discussed, which was in reviewing, you know, and doing an analysis on return on investment as you're moving forward in the path that you want to go on. At what point or what sort of challenges or I guess how have you overcome a crossroads where sometimes you do actually have to say no for a little bit to progress, so you can actually take a step back and reapply those investment funds into, say, infrastructure upgrade support or outsourcing or that sort of thing, where maybe, you know, you can't always do a parallel effort, but sometimes you do have to take a step backwards to move 2 steps forward. So,
yeah, I mean, for me, it would be really the network. You know, we're in the middle of, we're trying to get into it. We're in the process of setting up a zoned architecture within the network on the corporate side as well as the local area network. And so I think as we look, it's going to be all about the network and how you manage and what layer can they get to, right? You want them to stay, you want them only to have access to what they need to have access to. And so a lot of the federal government networks are flat, right? You get in, you get in. And so I think we got to now begin to think about the security of our networks. How do we create sort of a zoned architecture around our network? And so that's going to be extremely important, I think, moving on. But that's somewhere where we're going to have to invest. You know, you're going to have to invest in that in order to really secure the devices and make this your mobility sort of strategy work.
I have to agree that the infrastructure is definitely, the network is definitely the piece that holds up the progress of getting these devices. And more so, I think, because of the archives, I mentioned before, using group-wise does limit our ability to put on new devices. But like I said, as we look into cloud and moving our email and some of that infrastructure to a provider, that allows us then, particularly because I get calls almost every day, can I put my device on the network? Can I put my device on the network? And I have to tell them, well, sure, but then it belongs to the archives. It's not yours anymore, thanks for the donation. But I didn't tell them, but we're working on forward within the next 12 months, moving stuff to the cloud. At that point, then we'll have more policies on bringing your own device, more policies on how we can provide newer and better devices, and allow them to be centrally managed by the provider, and then not have to invest in having a Droid guy, a BlackBerry guy, an iPhone guy, all sitting in the same queue, running 3 different environments. So, particularly with the digital strategy that just came out, that's really going to help us to let our customers know, yes, we are working on it, yes, it's going to be available, just bear with us.
I agree with Adrian. You know, flattening the network is fundamentally key. I've had a different experience, I will say. I don't know that I've seen as many networks that are flat as I would like, because you know, that would be ideal. But flattening the network, if you were not doing QoS monitoring. So if your users are calling you when something is down before you know it, probably want to review that, because the integration between the application and the network is going to become much more fundamental to even prioritizing. So if somebody's streaming we were talking about earlier, a health record, okay? If I have that video, I might have to prioritize those packets over something else. And so the application, the network, the content delivery networks are all going to become much more tightly integrated. So monitoring the user experience of what they have, because at the point that the users are calling you when the system is down, it's too late, okay? Because you may have been impacted, many other people, and especially as we move to a multi-provider model. So, you know, we look at frameworks. So I'll use data.gov since it was brought to the highlighted in the federal digital federal strategy, that managing QoS to those data providers and actually, you know, enrolling them, vetting them, accrediting them through the application lifecycle management and ensuring compliance is one of the almost table stakes to really having an active mobile ecosystem. which I think is what we're all here trying to do.
I'll maybe take an application development perspective because that's what I'm most familiar with at this point. We basically created a Christmas list of everything that we wanted contained in our native app. And we had bids ranging from $10,000 all the way up to $100,000, which is a pretty broad spectrum. But we prioritize things. Like we know that we can do tablet optimization, but we didn't really budget it for us. We didn't establish that as a priority. So with development approaches, know what your priorities are, know the things that you can live with, you'd like to have, and then there's things that you absolutely cannot live without.
Any other questions? I think there was a question earlier, the gentleman in the back.
Well, I think actually Adrian answered it. The whole security architecture, as you move to these mobile apps, you now have an iPad that runs my house basically. Okay, it has for the heat, electricity, television, audio, all that stuff. So you take a very much consumer product now, and you're going to bring it into a government environment. And as the guy said last night, the teacher said last night, how much further are we going to go with this stuff? So your whole security posture now really got to be dynamic and move forward this process. That continuous monitoring that Pete talked about in the previous session was so important in this moving forward that I'm not sure government staffs understand how much they have to do that. So I think there's some more thinking to be done at OP level, GSA level, Adrian, you, and Alex, for example, to get the right people in the room and sort of talk about that security posture.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I actually, one of the terms that we're talking about is really security as a service, right?
Right.
I mean, so beginning to build that out as you stand up capabilities, you definitely have to think about the security of that capability on the front end of it. It's still, there's still agencies, and we know them sort of in the bowels of the agency where things are created without looking at the security of the 508 compliance or any of the other aspects that need to be considered, privacy, so on and so forth. But we've got to figure out a way to create security as a service as an enabler versus as an inhibitor. And so I think we're in the middle of that sort of transformation. We're not there yet. If you look at the FedRAMP process, I think that speaks to sort of an enablement of kind of security from a cloud perspective. But I think we've got to go more do more from a standpoint of looking at sort of this whole security as a service notion and thinking about security as an enabler, and then embedding that out of the box on our tools and capabilities that we serve up to our customers. And so, that's one of the huge challenges that not only government has, but the private sector has as well. I really would want the private sector to do more of that for us. I keep looking at you. I really would want them to do that for us, really, and to understand our environment and then create the opportunity where the security is already baked into the device, baked into the capability as they sell it to us, and then we begin to think about the management of it. And so I think we've got to really think about the security as sort of a front-end, hard-baked part of the initiation phase of any project. Initiation probably phase A if you're looking at sort of the life cycle. And so thinking about security on the very front end of that discussion, and then it becomes sort of risk management throughout that life cycle. Even when you get into operations. So we always make risk-based decisions, and whether you make them consciously or unconsciously, you are making them. When you get in your car, start it up, look in your rearview mirror, and decide to pull out, that was a risk-based decision, right? And so, we're doing it anyway, but now it really becomes just part of the process. So not thinking of security sort of sitting on the outside now, but really being a fundamental part of what we do and how we deliver service.
So I'll even jump in there since I was pretty much invited in. We talked about it earlier with the end-to-end, and it's much more even involved, like some of the things that we're doing around even integrating the telecoms themselves. Okay, for those of you that don't know, most telecoms update their botnet, what is blacklist about every 15 minutes. So integrating with those lists, seeing if the devices are transmitting traffic, and really looking at it from the end-to-end perspective. And I'll even take yours a step further. There's even a particular person in the room that would speak very passionately about it. But really, it's also moving it from a single provider to a multi-provider and a trusted broker that works across the different agencies, because I can personally say I worked on a project where, I was working on a collaboration with 3 different agencies, and depending on who I talked to, there was a different security policy associated with that data. And expecting the software to do it at runtime with a high volume, we're just not there yet. So I think figuring out how there's a level of commonality and policy rationalization, and then being able to work across multiple agencies, I think is a doable feat. But really a lot of that starts, definitely there is some technology advancement and policy enhancement that needs to occur to really truly enable that. Because I think once we have that, much tighter synergy, not only at the agency level, but also maybe even at the domain level with HR. And we heard the speaker this morning talk about the semantics of HR. Well, who can access which attributes? All of those types of questions come into the mix. And once we have that, and in an integrated fashion that we can leverage across the different layers, then I think we'll be at a point where we really can implement that trusted broker that works interagency, interdomain, et cetera.
And I think part of the conversations that we've had, a lot of the discussion has gone back down to this, really evaluating what the safeguards are that actually, instead of creating the boundaries and protecting against everything that can possibly come at you, even the unknowns, actually refining those boundaries to a lower level and what it is that you're actually letting out versus protecting against what's going in. So obviously all of those come back to where you're going to invest those dollars to get that to happen. So I want to thank everybody. Were there any questions last minute or something we have addressed everyone?
I just said no to my friend that work in the fitting like local governments and we're developing local governments and best practices. What it is, I didn't know security issues.
And vice versa.
Okay.
I think and vice versa. I think, if you look at a lot of what's happening at state and local, they're at the touch point of the citizen. And so they really know what works, right? Sitting at the federal level, I have scientists that I touch every day, and so we know what works there. But I think as you look at sort of a larger government issue, I think it is really going to happen at the state and local, where they are the ones that are actually touching the citizen. So I think sharing both ways is extremely important. We found that out with data.gov, from the standpoint of looking at when states and local entities began to stand up data.gov sort of opportunities and presence. That there was a good sharing between what was happening at the federal level and what's happening at the state and local and tribal. And so I think, we've got to make sure that I think that communication happens. So working with, organizations like NASIO and the like are extremely important to continue those dialogues.
And the archives doesn't really work with any of the local governments, so to speak, but we do work with our foundation on our presidential library side, where each presidential library has their own foundation, and they work very closely with developing apps to be able to present some of our holdings to the foundation. Through the foundation, and I know the Reagan Library Foundation produced an app where you can download it on your iPhone and you can look at photos and documents from Ronald Reagan's time as president. So not so much with the local, but with foundations and more private archival type of organizations or genealogies. I know we got a very big relationship with Ancestry.com. And we do some digitization for them. They do some for us. It's kind of a nice partnership. Their customers on Ancestry.com, which are most of the citizens, they help drive us to provide that genealogy information through some of their apps.
So I guess just to wrap up, I don't know if you had any closing thoughts that you wanted to, or a little bit over time, but
You know what? I'll save everybody from eating between them and lunch, so I'll hold my comments and I appreciate everybody's time.
So, well, thank you very much, and I'm actually really